What is going on with Anno 117 Pax Romana? Yet to fully release, but already sitting here with the majority of reviewers actively disliking it. Just 44% of Steam reviews are currently positive. Are these scores simply short-term blips, temporary and pegged to this early build? Or does the situation reflect a broader, deeper problem with Pax Romana that'll leave us with yet another disappointing game release in 2025? I'm going to break down the key criticisms today that have emerged around this build and try and figure out whether they will hurt the game proper. Let's begin with the timepiece-wearing elephant in the room, the content limitations in this demo build. I would add free public demo of Anno 117. That elephant is specifically the time limit in the top right-hand corner of the game screen, which is actually one of many content gameplay restrictions currently in place. The hour that you get is measured in real time, not game time, so going AFK for a glass of water will cost you, even if the in-game simulation is paused. Similarly, speeding up that simulation doesn't hasten your real-life hour in any way, at the end of which you're just done. No chance to take a picture or marvel in your work. It's back to the menus for you, good lad. The good news is that the demo is infinitely replayable. You can have as many 1-hour runs as you like, but you can't save one to come back to later. Both the Roman-inspired region or province of Latium and the unique sort of ancient British Celtic lands of Albion are available in this build to choose at the start of each run. Aside from that 1-hour limit, the other major limiting factor in this content lock that restricts you are really that you're kind of limited to the early game, the very early game, the first 2 tiers of population, basically, and the supply chains that come with them. Combat is essentially also disabled, and other elements, namely diplomacy, are naturally very limited in this build. To me, honestly, it kind of makes perfect sense to limit the unlocks, content, to the initial few series of population Tier 1 and Tier 2. It's a 2-month early, completely free demo after all. They don't want to give the whole game away. Maybe there's still more work to do later on. Maybe it's just meant to be a teaser, I don't know. Most of the frustration and disappointment I've seen thus far has been focused on that 1-hour, real-life hour game cap. And on one level, I actually totally and completely agree. Let's be clear. 1 hour is not long enough to experience this game, no doubt in my mind. But I also want to be clear on why I'm a little critical here. It's not coming from a place of, stuff you for only giving me unlimited 1-hour restarts. I'm cancelling my pre-order. I mean, I can hear your mum in the background saying, just be grateful, you get to play it at all. And you've pre-ordered a game in 2025, son? Are you mad? And frankly, I agree with her on both of those points. But also, it's just a free demo. And my argument is not in favor of the 1-hour limit here, though. Let me be clear. It's less boo, pre-order, grrr noises, and more, I think this is maybe a bad decision for the game's players and the game's sellers, for all parties. And it's not from that purely emotional frustration. It's not the limit of time per se, but what that does to people's behaviors and perceptions of the game. It almost feels like it kind of forces you into a speedrun game that should not be sped through. It forces often harsh, rushed, potentially panicked decision-making. And when you combine that with the pressure that an Anno experience might deliver, it can be complex, it can be complicated, particularly if you are a new player, the exact kind of player, by the way, that might pick up a free public demo. I think that the 1-hour limit is a big drawback and a big problem. The rest of the content limits do make sense to me, though. But just 1 hour? I haven't really even touched on other factors here, right? Like the game that arguably looks better than any other Anno game before it can't be savored for longer than an hour. I'd love to just spend a little bit of time at the end even just watching the simulation at work, even if I couldn't build anything else. Perhaps admiring my work in a way. Maybe, a little self-inflating. Or maybe just taking the time to understand the beautiful world a little better. I think the 1 hour limit hurts all parties and could have a lasting impact on people's perceptions of the game. Okay, let's talk about the actual game then now, shall we? The stuff that may matter beyond perception. And it'll matter at launch over the coming months. The big gripe here, at the Mo anyway, is the UI. This is a painfully familiar complaint to me as someone who's covered a lot of, say, Civilization VII's developments since its release. As far as I can tell, there are 3 key user interface UI issues. Firstly, it's the bugs. The big one, to be frank. Boy, are they frustrating. Tabs or tools that stay open is one of the most annoying things. Oh, and the overlapping UI messages and errors as well, or tooltips, whatever they are, they seem to get stuck, and it feels messy. I feel like I've played a version of the game that looked better, and also didn't have these bugs, and so I'm gonna just put them aside for now. Don't get me wrong, they need to be fixed. I'm just fairly sure they will be remedied, and hopefully that'll be relatively easy. The second UI gripe is that the interface isn't thematically appropriate. Simply put, it just doesn't match the setting. And yeah, it's more generic than that, I do agree. I've been dipping my toes recently actually into the very deep sea of Victoria 3, and that's a game that has kind of a similar common problem or criticism. Vicky 3 sorted it by selling various reskins of the UI, but these could also be added to other games like this one in future for free. Lastly, on the UI, people feel it just quite isn't really that functional, or it's too console-y, too driven by console development and that simultaneous release that's taking place this time around with this game on both PC and console. They argue it caters too readily for console players, and this comes at the expense of us PC users. While I do agree with the first UI critiques broadly, I find this one a little less convincing because it's perhaps inadvertently an argument against accessibility, and that's an argument I can't really get behind. I don't think it needs to be an us versus them situation either, by the way. I think if there does need to be a remedy here, it can be one that doesn't screw over another group of people. And actually, maybe that's the point of their critique. I said there were 3 main UI critiques a few minutes ago, but actually in my mind there's kind of a 4th one. It's almost the exact same criticism I talked about in my early gameplay impressions video from a few months ago, so I'll summarize it here pretty succinctly for you. Essentially, the game needs to display or highlight my weak spots, say overwhelming resource shortages, or simple inefficiencies that one extra building could solve. It doesn't necessarily need to hold my hand the whole way, but I'd like to better be able to visualize my shortcomings, or have the tools to identify and solve my problems better. And in my view, it still hasn't got there yet on this one. I feel like experienced players won't really find that to be an issue, right? You're an expert, you don't need it. But newer players just might. Beyond the woes we've discussed so far, I actually think that Anno 117 is a pretty satisfying city builder. A historical Anno game, finally again, with great potential. I like it. It looks subjectively the best that an Anno game has ever looked, and I love its overall style, and the distinct differences, by the way, between the game's 2 provinces. I thought I'd do a playthrough of the demo build, my last video in fact here on the channel, and a fairly monstrous one at that, during the 2 playthroughs actually in said video. I genuinely enjoyed most of what I was able to experience. Speaking of my experience, your individual one will obviously vary based on your hardware, the machine you're running the game on. Personally, I haven't had any major performance woes in this very limited build of Anno 117. I'm running a 1490 GPU, by the way, for context, and honestly, an in need of replacement CPU that I think might be a good 3 or 4 years old at this point. I want to say 12900 Intel, if that means anything to you. Either way, I was able to get the demo to run at 4K, the natural resolution of my monitor, despite it launching frustratingly, locking me into 1440p resolution. My workaround was to disable disable the resolution of my monitor, I should say to change it to 1080p, and then change it back. I did that in the Windows settings. When I reverted it back, I relaunched Anno and it launched in 4K. I don't know if that'll work for you too, but it worked for me. I would say the frame rate was probably the only area of actual performance that I would like to see some improvement in, especially given that these are relatively early game settings. Well, no relatively about it. It was generally pretty good though, don't get me wrong, but not a consistent 60 FPS minimum, occasionally dipping. I'd like to say maybe it dropped to about 40 or 50 FPS, which is really not that bad, but it could do with a little bit of an improvement, I think. Now, I'm also recording footage at the same time, running a probably more nuanced setup than many of you because I make videos and put them on the internet, so I mightn't be the best measure of performance. I would just quickly like to add there. My overall takeaway from this build is that it's decent. It hasn't personally been problematic on the performance side of things, nor has it led to actually any game crashes so far. Finally, before I wrap up here, the compulsory use of the Ubisoft Launcher also continues to irk people. I get it. It's an extra step, an extra hoop to jump through, and it's admin. I personally don't lose too much sleep over it. So, let's conclude this ramble-fest reflection on this game. I ultimately really enjoy Anno 117 Pax Romana. I think it's going to be a great Anno game, and as we've discussed, it's quite satisfying, but also one that's not without its flaws at the moment in this demo build. Ultimately, a pretty limited build, acting really as a free teaser mode ahead of the game's full release in my view. And of all the things we've discussed, there are two that really ought to be remedied. In the short term, considering the balance of perspectives and views clearly on display, I think really everyone would benefit from a more generous and forgiving time limit on the demo. Even just one more extra hour, right? Take it up to 2, 3 hours max. With all of the other limits in place, maybe with the exception of the inability to save and load, but I could even be convinced out of that caveat if the demo just gave us a bit more time to savor and understand the moment. And I think everyone would benefit from that. In the longer term, it's got to be the UI. Namely the issues and frustrations, to be clear. The bugs, the overlapping or lack of info in places. Overall, I think it's actually quite a solid city builder, RTS strategy game, Roman Empire builder. Has some problems. I think it can work through them, and I do intend to cover it more as we move closer to release and actually get our hands on that full version around early to mid-November of this year. Let me know down below how much you disagree with me. Obviously, there's a bit of bias involved when I'm talking subjectively about my thoughts, but hopefully I've managed to cover, at least introduce the key criticisms, the key sticking points that have emerged over the last couple of days. Thank you for bearing with my sick voice. I know it's annoying. Apologies. I'm gonna go and, have a glass of water and a nap or something maybe. Either way, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.